This video was made thanks to this one commenter. There's something to be said about how hard some of the fandom rides for Timebomb, specifically with main timeline Jinx and main timeline Ekko, despite how toxic of a relationship it is. A lot of it comes from hoping that the two would find each other in every universe. It's true that Ekko has known Powder for longer than even Vi has at that point, long enough to witness her transition from Powder to Jinx, and with enough empathy to be turned down and rejected by Jinx when he tries to save her from Silco. But considering that the scenes from the final act, where Ekko and Jinx help each other build an airship, fix Jinx's machine gun, and tailor the clothing for the big fight, were all deleted, we have to ask ourselves, why were those scenes deleted? Why doesn't Timebomb work in this universe, but does in others? And why was this pairing cut out while Kate Vi, Mel Jace, and J Vic were able to see their beginnings and endings? For starters, Timebomb only worked in the alternative universe because Vi died in the explosion during the heist, and Jace presumably went to jail for life. The rift in the timeline starts there. Vi dies, the enforcers find Jace's weapons, Jace goes to jail, and Hex Tech is never created. The kids go to court, but their motive of escaping poverty leads Piltover to gain empathy for Zaun, the borders are never built, and Zaun gains its independence without more bloodshed. With this independence, the smartest kids of Zaun are able to thrive in the sunlight, presumably with proper schooling, and Ekko is the one to jump in and help Powder heal from her grief rather than Silco. In fact, presumably, Silco forgave Vander for trying to kill him when he heard the news that Violet passed, so it's safe to assume the most influence he has on Powder's life is as the uncle with the really expensive Christmas gifts who leaves all the functions early. Although the overall level of joy is the main cause for Timebomb's rift in the main timeline, Silco remains the real detriment. But on top of that, Powder is able to create healthy coping mechanisms to deal with her trauma. I once saw a post saying that Jinx is Powder with BPD and AU Powder is Jinx without BPD, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Both of these girls have BPD or PTSD or some sort of schizoaffective disorder, but only one of these girls has a support system and healthy coping mechanisms. You even see it in episode 7 of season 2, when Ekko accuses Powder of killing Violet herself. She asks him to leave before she says or does something that she regrets. That's therapy talk. That's setting a boundary. That's self-regulation. That's someone who knows they're mentally unstable, who has the resources and support to not hurt the people around them. So Powder is a well-rounded and smart individual who recognizes her talent as a scientist and engineer. But what about Ekko? It's not too clear what happened with Ekko in the alternative universe. He didn't have to see Benzo's gourd body, he's able to excel in his scientific studies, and the wiki implies that Ekko being taken over by alternate versions of himself is a common occurrence, using Powder's comment that he's having another identity crisis as evidence. However, I don't buy it. I'd like to take it at face value and assert that AU Ekko actually has identity crises. In the main timeline, Ekko is forced to choose to live by the people and for the people. He throws everything he has at providing a safe haven for Zaunites and stopping the sale and manufacturing of Shimmer. He has no other option. All of his friends are dead and his crush is being used by the drug lord himself. He's very clear on what he wants to accomplish and has the motivation and self-confidence to go in the path of his goals. But without that trauma, without the preliminary pressure to be something greater for the people, he's at a loss. He's smart enough to engineer a plant that produces oxygen without sunlight, but only with Powder and Clagger's help. But he's constantly somewhere else, scribbling in his notebooks and becoming the madness to Powder's genius. I think it's safe to assume, without the constant threat of violence, without needing to be the boy savior, AU Ekko feels lost in his identity and constantly switches up on who he thinks he wants to be. Now, how far this goes, whether it's small but noticeable changes in his mood or genuine switches in personality, is never made clear to the viewer. But I do think that in the alternate universe, Ekko and Jinx switch places. However, I believe that just like Powder, Ekko would be able to overcome with his support system and lead a fairly normal life like he is. So Jinx and Ekko essentially flip-flop in the AU. So why doesn't it work in the main timeline? Well, for starters, Jinx kills people. You can't have the boy savior fall in love with the mass murderer. That's just not in his archetype. However, and more importantly, although he cares about her, she doesn't care about him, romantically or platonically. Jinx couldn't care less about Ekko, but Ekko's whole archetype is caring about strangers and the sick and needy and the suffering, which is what Jinx is to him, a friend who is suffering, someone else to save. But to Jinx, he's an obstacle constantly getting in the way.
But he was always looking for a way to get closer to Silco because he thought that Silco was keeping Powder prisoner. He finally, after all this work, finds Powder in Silco's lair, and he says, "I'm here to rescue you." And she says, "I don't want to be rescued. I'm Jinx now." And then when he tries to pull her out of there physically, she slapped him the same way that Vi slapped her in episode 3.
Trying to pull her away from Silco, interfering with Silco's manufacturing, protecting a cop for the sake of stopping her from hurting anyone else. But to him, he's a friend who refuses to give up on her. And now, knowing that Ekko can't change anything about the tree he spent so long nurturing, being corrupted by the Arcane at its roots,
that tree means so much. It's our food, fresh air.
We built our whole identity around it.
he finds another thing worth fighting for. But why was their screen time cut short? Why weren't we given the scenes of them working together and rallying up bottom side to fight alongside top side? Why was their relationship deemed less important than the other relationships in Arcane, is what I'm trying to say. And although there are no interviews asking that exact question, I do think that we know why. It's because Jinx's relationship with Isha is far more important to show on screen than Jinx's relationship with Ekko, because their impact on the overall plot is far greater than whatever romantic tension Jinx and Ekko could have given. The outcome of their relationship has no sort of impact on the story, and like Kristen Link says, they have to figure out how to tell the main plot points, the overarching story, above letting us know the relationship status of these characters. Artists still tried to paint their own versions of events to fill in the gaps, and the fandom clearly wanted to see an end to the pairing stories. While Mel J and J Vic got final goodbyes, and Kate Vi got the chance to verbally choose each other, Timebomb's last conversation left the door open for more. Their final interaction was rooted in Ekko saving Jinx's life and ushering her to look towards a brighter future. All Ekko wanted was to save Jinx, and all Jinx wanted was for someone to care enough to try over and over, rejection after rejection, to love her even though she's different now. So, although Timebomb may not be canon in a romantic sense, the relationship they have in the main universe feels more important to me. They both become each other's reason to keep fighting, even if just for a moment.
So you're telling me that pattern is on my tree because you pissed the Arcane off with all your demands?
That's not what I...